So Percy Jackson has been one of my favorite book series for a long time. I have always loved it. And when I saw that people were doing these recap videos for book series and other pieces of media, I wanted to jump on it. I wanted to do Percy Jackson specifically because it is like my favorite book series. So that is what I'm going to be doing today. I am going to be recapping the first book in the Percy Jackson series, The Lightning Thief. I'm going to do the other ones. I'm just splitting this up by book, so it's going to be 5 videos in the series, so keep an eye out for that. I am super excited to do that for you guys. And yeah, I wanted to do the fun like picture wall. I literally did it at home and it was pretty cool, but I found out halfway through filming the last book that my microphone did not pick up any of the audio that I had filmed. So that was pretty frustrating. It was just really crappy audio quality, so I didn't want to include it. So I thought, you know what? I'm gonna wait till my roommate's gone and we're gonna have fun. We're gonna be interrupted by noises in the dorm and we're just gonna sit and talk about Percy Jackson. So yeah, that's what I'm gonna do today. I also wore this shirt. It says Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium. I know it is backwards, but I just like filming with the camera flipped, so that's what you get. But it's an Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium shirt, so if you know, you know. I'm not gonna have clever shirts for every video, unfortunately, but I got one for this one. But yeah, so instead of doing a picture wall, I have a slideshow with all of the pictures. It looks very chaotic, but that's how we're gonna do it. And yeah, so anyways, let's get into the video. I also did want to give credit to the people that I originally saw do these types of videos. The first person I saw do this was Mike's Mike with his Pretty Little Liars recap series. That was a ton of fun. I absolutely loved watching that, and that was part of the reason I wanted to do this. Another person that I saw do this and what gave me the idea to do it with a book series was Carrie Can Read. She did a series of videos recapping the A Court of Thorns and Roses series, and that was really what made me want to do this with a book series. So yeah, absolutely go and check those 2 series out if you enjoy this kind of content and if that's something that you want to see. So wanted to throw that in there. So before we start, I want to make a note that these books all have some really funny chapter titles, so I wanted to make sure that I shared some of my favorite chapter titles from each of these books, so that's what we're going to be doing. So here are some of the favorite chapter titles from book 1, The Lightning Thief. So first we have I accidentally vaporize my pre-algebra teacher, I become Supreme Lord of the Bathroom, and we get advice from a poodle. Those are my favorite chapter titles. So one important thing to note about this book is that the beginning is a bit of an info dump. There is a lot of world building that we need to do for this book, so bit of an info dump. I'm sorry about that. Now, we open this book on one of the most iconic book openings that I have ever read, so I'm going to read that for you guys now. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. If you're reading this because you think you might be one, my advice is close this book right now. Believe whatever lie your mom or dad told you about your birth and try to lead a normal life. Being half-blood is dangerous. It's scary. Most of the time, it gets you killed in painful, nasty ways. If you're a normal kid, reading this because you think it's fiction, great. Read on. I envy you for being able to believe that none of this ever happened. But if you recognize yourself in these pages, if you feel something stirring inside, stop reading immediately. You might be one of us. And once you know that, it's only a matter of time before they sense it too, and they'll come for you. Don't say I didn't warn you. So Percy Jackson, our main character right here in this first book, is a 12-year-old boy who's going to this boarding school in upstate New York called Yancey Academy, and this is a school for like trouble kids. And his class right now is on the field trip to the New York Metropolitan Museum of Art for their Latin class. The Latin teacher's name is Mr. Brunner, and he's described as like a middle-aged guy in a wheelchair, and this dude literally has a million different types of like Greek and Roman weapons in his classroom, which seems really dangerous for a whole bunch of middle schoolers. Like, that just doesn't seem like a smart idea to have all of those weapons lying around. Yeah, it's just me. However, it's pretty clear that this is the reason that he is Percy's favorite teacher. So we get to learn a little bit more about Percy here. He has some bad luck on field trips, and in the past he has blown up a school bus using a Revolutionary War cannon, dropped his class into a pool of sharks, and apparently there's others, but we don't learn about those. And we're also introduced to Percy's best friend Grover here as well, and we're also introduced to the resident mean girl, Nancy Bobofit. She is throwing pieces of her sandwich into Grover's hair, and Percy has to hold himself back. He's kind of on probation right now. He cannot mess anything up, otherwise he's getting expelled. So once we get to the museum, Percy's kind of watching Mr. Brunner, and he's realizing that this dude's kind of looking at all these old Greek statues and paintings, and he's looking at them like he knows the people that are in the paintings or whatever, He's got the kind of look of recognition, like he personally knew them, which is a little odd. We also get introduced to Mrs. Dodds over here, who is the pre-algebra teacher and the other chaperone on the trip. She loves Nancy, hates Percy, and there's even a moment where Percy's like, I literally don't think this woman is human, and Grover's like, you have no idea. So they reach a painting, and Mr. Brunner asks Percy to explain what it means, and luckily Percy knows it. It is a painting of the Titan Kronos eating his children, so Percy explains that. However, Mr. Brunner is then all right, how does this relate to real life? And Percy's like, I have no idea. Nobody eats their kids like that. And Mr. Brunner's like, it is essential that you learn how this relates to real life, Percy. So later on after that, they are outside eating their lunch, and Nancy's just being a pain as usual. She drops her sandwich into Grover's lap, and Percy's had enough. He's like, nope, I am not taking this anymore. So he just stands up, and then all of a sudden Nancy is in the fountain that he and Grover were sitting on, and she is soaking wet. No idea how she got there. Mrs. Dodds is quick to drag Percy away, blaming him immediately, of course, and she drags him back into the museum. And they are back in the same section they were in before, the Greek section, and she starts saying some really weird things to him. She says, we are not fools, Percy Jackson. It was only a matter of time before we found you out. Confess and you will suffer less pain. So Mrs. Dodds over here then turns into some shriveled old lady with bat wings. Creepy. And lunges to attack Percy. Not great. Luckily though, Mr. Brunner comes in, he throws this pen at Percy, and somehow mid-air the pen transforms, and suddenly Percy's holding a sword, and it's one of the swords that he recognizes from Mr. Brunner's classroom. So this monster thing lunging at you, sword in hand, what's the most logical thing to do? Percy swings a sword, and Mrs. Dodds, I don't know, turns into just a pile of dust. Completely turns to dust. So that happened, and when Percy turns around, Mr. Brunner's not there. He is all alone. The sword has also turned back into a pen at this point. Now, Percy goes back outside, and Mr. Brunner is sitting exactly where he was sitting before, like he had never moved, and Percy, gives him his pen back. He gets back to Grover, and he's asking Grover, hey, where's Mrs. Dodds? And Grover's like, Mrs. Dodds? We've never had a Mrs. Dodds at this school. Huh? Weird. So Percy goes back to Yancey, and he's just trying to make it through the rest of the year with no issues. And he keeps trying to bring up Mrs. Dodds to other people, but nobody is giving him anything. He thinks they're all playing a giant prank on him, but everyone seems to be assured that Mrs. Dodds is not real. Except Grover. A couple times Percy's able to catch him slipping up on stuff, and he's getting really suspicious. Percy is able to make it pretty much throughout the entire year, and then one teacher said something and he slips up and he calls that teacher an old sot, whatever that means. This gets Percy expelled. At the end of the year, he's going to be able to finish the year, but after that, he is not welcome back at Yancey Academy. So, finals are coming up, and Percy is going to go and apologize to Mr. Brunner for potentially failing his exam. He thinks he's going to fail, and once he gets outside of Mr. Brunner's office, he hears voices inside, and it's Mr. Brunner and Grover talking, and He overhears the two of them mention things such as like a kindly one and the mist, and then something about the summer solstice and like not rushing him, whoever him is. And Grover also mentions that he cannot fail again. So Percy just like runs back to his room so he doesn't get caught like eavesdropping on them. Now the terms come to an end, Percy's ready to get home, and he and Grover end up on the same Greyhound bus back through the city. And the bus stops at one point and they notice these like 3 old ladies outside on like a little farm stand knitting something. And one of them like cuts the thread that they're working with, and Grover is like horrified. He gives Percy this like little business card with his name and it says protector on it or something. And Percy's just kind of freaked out about the whole thing, and he high-key ditches Grover at one of the stops and takes a cab back to his mom's apartment. Now, Percy gets back to the apartment and we meet one of the worst characters in the whole series, Smelly Gabe over here. He is Percy's abusive stepfather, and he immediately takes the extra money Percy got from the cab ride. And yeah, we don't like Gabe. Gabe is horrible. However, soon Percy's mom comes home, Sally. She works at a candy store and she brought Percy back some candy, and it's all blue candy because they've got a running joke about blue food. Everything has to be blue essentially. So we are able to learn a tiny bit about Percy's dad here, which isn't a lot, but only that he made his mom happy and that he was apparently lost at sea. Eventually, Sally explains to Percy that they are going back to Montauk, which is where they spend their vacations. They get there, everything's going well, and it's really reminding Percy more and more of his childhood, and this is just kind of like a nice moment after all of these struggles of the end of the year. However, school gets brought up, and Sally mentions that she is gonna have to send Percy back to another boarding school in the fall. She has to send him away in order to keep him safe. But she also mentions that there's a summer camp that his dad had wanted to send him to, but she doesn't like elaborate on that idea like anymore. So there is this big storm outside the cabin that night, and Percy dreams of these like 2 horses fighting one another, and he is then awoken by some knocking on his door. Who's there? Grover. However, there's something different about Grover. Grover ran for the Camaro, but he wasn't running, exactly. He was trotting, shaking his shaggy hindquarters, and suddenly his story about a muscular disorder in his legs made sense to me. I understood how he could run so fast and still limp when he walked, because where his feet should be, there were no feet. There were cloven hooves. This is Grover, by the way. I didn't want to point it out because I didn't want to spoil that if you guys haven't read the books. But this is Grover. So Grover gets there and he is like panicking, telling Sally that something followed him there and that they really need to leave like right now. So they get in the car. Percy is freaking out, and like as a normal person would, and Sally and Grover are just not telling him anything. These two, they know something and they are not telling him anything. He's still trying to process the fact that his best friend is clearly not human, and there's just a lot of things going on right now. And Grover eventually tells him that Mrs. Dodds definitely was real. Absolutely. He also said something about keeping the monsters away, whatever that means. So now they have made it to the top of this hill and they can see like a farmhouse down below at the bottom of the hill. And they're like seemingly in the middle of nowhere. And Sally explains that this is the camp that Percy's dad wanted to send him to. They are just about to get out of the car when it gets like completely flipped over. Luckily everyone's alright, but Grover's like a little bit out of it and needs help like walking. So Sally tells Percy to take Grover and run to this large pine tree that is at the top of the hill. Back in the road where they had come from, however, Percy notices something running towards them. It was a dark silhouette of a huge guy, like a football player. He seemed to be holding a blanket over his head. His top half was bulky and fuzzy. His upraised hands made it look like he had horns. Sally is telling Percy to run, and Grover keeps like muttering something about food, and Percy is just so confused because he's not getting any answers. He never really gets answers, by the way, to anything. So Sally's telling Percy, get to the tree. I can't go with you. I can't cross the property line. Percy's even more confused by that, and He is finally able to get Grover up the hill with the help of his mom, but that's when the thing gets really close and Percy's finally able to see what that thing chasing them was. It was the Minotaur. Percy's like, oh my gosh, is that? And then his mom stops and like, nope, don't say anything. Names have power, which is the thing that's really, really stressed in this book, but not necessarily super stressed in a lot of the other books. But in this book, it's very well stressed that names have power. So the Minotaur has really bad sight and hearing, but his smell is really good, and it doesn't take him long to find the three of them. They have to split up at some point to avoid getting skewered by the Minotaur's horns, and Percy is running towards the hill, and he turns around to see that his mom is like leading the Minotaur away from him and Grover. However, Sally isn't fast enough, and the Minotaur grabs her. Then, with an angry roar, the monster closed his fists around my mother's neck, and she dissolved before my eyes, melting into light, a shimmering golden form, as if she were a holographic projection. A blinding flash, and she was simply gone. So, the Minotaur now turns his attention back to Grover, who is just kind of like lying on the ground on the hill. Percy then becomes a complete badass out of nowhere, pulling off some like crazy jump and ripping off one of the Minotaur's horns. I should mention that it is raining during this scene. Percy takes that piece of the horn and uses that to stab the Minotaur in the gut, causing him to turn to dust the exact same way that Mrs. Dodds did. Percy is feeling a ton of emotions right now, but he's also very exhausted, and he's able to get Grover and bring him to the porch of the farmhouse that was at the bottom of the hill. And he is just about to pass out when he sees a man with a beard who looks really familiar to him and a blonde girl with curly hair like a princess. And he hears the girl say, he's the one, he has to be, before Percy just passes out. So Percy wakes up at one point and the blonde girl is there, and she is feeding him something that feels like pudding but tastes like popcorn, which is kind of weird. And as soon as she can see that he's kind of awake, she starts like bombarding him with questions like, what's happening on the summer solstice? What was stolen? And Percy, so confused, doesn't know what's happening and just passes out again. So he wakes up again, and this time there's like a surfer dude there, but he's got like eyes all over his body. Grover is also there, except he looks just like a human guy again. And Percy's kind of thinking, all right, maybe I just had the weirdest dream I've ever had in my whole life. However, Grover reveals that everything that Percy thinks happened did happen, and he just like breaks down apologizing for failing him and his mom, and this is where it really hits Percy. His mom is gone. She's really gone. So Grover then gives Percy a shoebox with the Minotaur horn in it, and also he gives him this drink called nectar, which is supposed to heal people and tastes like your favorite memories. And then Grover's like, all right, Mr. D and Chiron want to talk to you. So when they get to the back porch, Percy finds none other than Mr. Brunner sitting there playing a game with some guy in a really loud Hawaiian shirt. And the blonde girl is also there, and Grover introduces Percy to everybody. The guy in the Hawaiian shirt is this guy over here. His name is Mr. D, and he's the camp director. The blonde girl over here, her name's Annabeth Chase. And Mr. Brunner is actually named Chiron, and he is this guy who is a centaur. They haven't said it yet, but he is a centaur. This is Mr. Brunner, this is Chiron. That's his actual name, is Chiron. So this is where we get the iconic line where rather than greeting Percy, Annabeth's just like, you drool in your sleep. Iconic. So this whole time, Mr. D is like really off-putting. He's really rude, and this is kind of Percy's official welcome to Camp Half-Blood. That is what it is called. Chiron sends Annabeth off and starts to kind of explain some things to Percy. And this is where he drops the big bomb on him. The Greek gods are still real. Percy's going through it right now, and he like starts kind of naming some of them for like clarification, and Mr. D is like, buddy, names have power. Again, really important in this book for some reason. And this is kind of like a lot for Percy to take in. Apparently, Mr. D had been cursed by his father and is now forced to run this camp, and he explains that his father is Zeus. Had to use the Love and Thunder Zeus because it's hilarious. Eventually, Percy's able to figure out that Mr. D stands for Dionysus, the god of wine. Percy is then sent off to his new home, Cabin 11, and on the walk over there, Chiron tells him how the gods have kind of like moved with Western civilization, like where the most powerful nation is. So it went from Greece to Rome, some other places, and is now currently in America. Chiron has gotten out of his wheelchair at this point and he's walking around just fully as a centaur. So as they're walking, Percy notices that everybody there is wearing these bright orange t-shirts. Like, you can see everyone, all of these people, all campers, they're bright orange t-shirts. He even spots something like moving in the attic of the big house, which is the farmhouse that they've been in, and he receives no answer about what it is when he asks. But Chiron then reveals that Grover might kind of get in trouble for not really doing his duties as a protector, which Percy's like appalled by because Grover got him to camp just fine. But Chiron's like, it's not up to me, it's up to the Council of Cloven Elders, which is like a council of satyrs. I didn't say it before, Grover is a satyr. He's got goat legs and hooves. He's a satyr. Percy then goes on to learn about the big Capture the Flag event that happens. It's something really big that everyone gets into that they do at camp. There's also a pavilion for dining, and Chiron here implies that weather is not a problem at this camp, and essentially no weather gets in unless they allow it. Percy then finally gets to see the cabins. There are 12 of them. They're like in a U shape, and each of them are numbered, correlating to one of the 12 Olympian gods. He makes it to Cabin 11, and Annabeth is there sitting on the steps, seemingly like waiting for him. She shows him the inside, and it is packed with people. Annabeth calls Percy undetermined, which makes everybody inside the cabin groan. And then we are introduced to Luke Castellan, the leader of Cabin 11. He explains that Cabin 11 takes in anybody that doesn't really have a place in any of the other cabins. Cabin 11 is the Hermes cabin, who is the like messenger of the gods. And when Percy's like, hey, how long do I have to be here? Luke's like, you're here until you're determined, buddy. And Percy's like, okay, how long does that take? And everyone in the cabin just kind of like laughs at him. Being claimed and becoming determined is something that really doesn't happen very often. And even some of the kids that get claimed don't have a cabin that correlates with their parent. So they have to stay in the Hermes cabin. So Annabeth's like, all right, let's get out of here. And she continues giving him a tour of the camp. And she tells him that the chance that he got to fight the Minotaur is something that a ton of other campers like dream of. They want to fight a monster, and he got that before he even showed up to camp. She explains that the monsters go to Tartarus, which is like a giant evil pit when they die, and every once in a while they get a chance to go back to the mortal world. She explains that Mrs. Dodds was a kindly one, or one of Hades's furies, and I kind of spoiled it earlier, but this is where we get the reveal that everyone at camp is a child of one of the Greek gods. Percy is also one. We then get introduced to quite the character, love her to bits, Clarice. She's this big, burly daughter of Ares who is the god of war. And Clarice takes Percy through a bit of a little initiation, which is essentially just dunking his head into the toilet. However, she goes to do that, and Percy ends up making every single one of the toilets explode and completely drenches Clarice and her friends, as well as Annabeth, in toilet water. However, Percy, who was in the middle of this whole mess, is somehow dry. Annabeth drags Percy away and tells him that she really wants him on her Capture the Flag team. So we get to learn a little bit more about our girl, Annabeth, over here. She is the daughter of Athena, goddess of wisdom, and she hasn't really seen her dad since she was little because she ran away from home and got to camp at 7 years old. She explains that some people stay at camp for the summer. Some people stay year-round. It's really up to them. And the camp is protected by a magical barrier that keeps monsters out unless they are invited in by somebody. And she explains the only real way to leave camp during the summer is if you are granted a quest, which does not happen very often. So now we get to learn a little bit more about the summer solstice that everyone seems to keep continuing to mention. Annabeth, Luke, and some of the other campers got to visit Mount Olympus during the winter solstice. And after they left, the weather started getting really weird. And Annabeth says that she heard something about something important being stolen. And it needs to be returned by the summer solstice. And she was really hoping that Percy would know something about this. And this seems to kind of line up really well with what Mrs. Dodds was saying. Percy obviously doesn't know anything though. So at dinner that night, Percy is introduced to like the dining pavilion and how it works. Essentially, you just like think of whatever you want and it like appears on your plate. Amazing. And the campers have to scrape off part of their like meal into like this like fire and sacrifice it to the gods. And you have to sit with your cabin, nobody else. And from there, Percy kind of like gets settled into camp life. He learns ancient Greek from Annabeth and spends time trying to figure out what he is good at, which seems to be a struggle for him. I haven't mentioned this before, but Percy is dyslexic and has ADHD, which we learn is something that's very common in pretty much most of the demigods. The dyslexia is because their brains are hardwired to read ancient Greek, and the ADHD is their like battle instincts, keeping them like energized and like moving, you know? Finally, we get to sword lessons. And his first lesson is with Luke, and Luke is really good with the sword. He's not going easy on Percy, and they get to a break. Like Luke dumps water over himself, so Percy's like, if Luke's doing it, I'm gonna do it. So he dumps water all over himself. He instantly like starts to feel better and feels more energized, and he is able to finally do the move that Luke was trying to teach him, effectively disarming Luke. So later on, he gets a moment to talk with Grover, and we learn that Grover's protector's license got suspended, and the only way for him to get it back is if Percy is somehow granted a quest, and Grover goes along with him and protects Percy throughout the whole quest and brings him back safely. Just tall order. I learn a little bit more about the cabins and the gods here as well. Cabin 6 belongs to Athena, cabin 8 belongs to Artemis, and cabin 2 belongs to Hera. Artemis and Hera's cabins are kind of honorary because they don't have kids. We also learn what the big 3 are. The big 3 are the gods Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades. They don't have kids either because they took an oath after World War II that they wouldn't have any more kids, so right now their cabins are empty. However, we learn that Zeus over here broke his oath and had a child 17 years ago. She was named Thalia. Thalia? I'll say Thalia. However, when she tried to come to camp 5 years ago, something happened. Percy, children of the Big 3 have powers greater than other half-bloods. They have a strong aura, a scent that attracts monsters. When Hades found out about the girl, he wasn't too happy about Zeus breaking his oath. Hades let the worst monsters out of Tartarus to torment Thalia. A satyr was assigned to be her keeper when she was 12, but there was nothing he could do. He tried to escort her here with a couple of other half-bloods she'd befriended. They almost made it. They got all the way to the top of the hill. He pointed across the valley to the pine tree where I had fought the Minotaur. All 3 kindly ones were after them, along with a horde of hellhounds. They were about to be overrun when Thalia told her satyr to take the other 2 half-bloods to safety while she held off the monsters. She was wounded and tired, and she didn't want to live like a hunted animal. The satyr didn't want to leave her, but he couldn't change her mind, and he had to protect the others. So, Thalia made her final stand alone at the top of that hill. As she died, Zeus took pity on her. He turned her into that pine tree. Her spirit still helps protect the borders of the valley. That's why the hill is called Half-Blood Hill. And then fast forward a little bit, it's time for Capture the Flag now. It is a huge deal, everyone takes it seriously, and there's like real armor and weapons involved. On one team is the Apollo cabin, Athena cabin, and Hermes cabin, and on the other is Ares, Demeter, Aphrodite, Dionysus, and Hephaestus. If you think those sound uneven, they're not. Athena, Apollo, and Hermes are the largest of the cabins. Percy gets assigned to border patrol, which means just stand at the creek and guard it because that is the border between the 2 halves, like the 2 different like teams' territories. So while Percy's on border patrol, he ends up hearing Clarice's voice along with a couple of her friends, and they go up and start to taunt and like beat Percy up. And yeah, this is their revenge for the whole toilet incident. I should probably also mention that Clarice has an electric spear, which is really sick, but not so great for Percy. He is losing really badly and ends up falling back into the creek, and the water seems to like wake up Percy's senses, and he is somehow able to fight back against 3 Aries kids, taking each one of them out. And just then, cheers can be heard, and Percy looks to see Luke and some of the other kids from the Hermes cabin running across the border holding the flag. And then Percy like hears Annabeth's voice next to him, but he turns and she's not there. However, she like takes off this hat, and we learn that she's got this Yankees hat that like turns her invisible, which is also sick. She had set this whole thing up knowing that Clarice was gonna go after Percy for revenge, which would take away some of their best fighters, and this left an opportunity for Luke to go and grab the flag. Annabeth then points to Percy, and she points out that the cuts on his arm are starting to heal. And I should mention, he's still in the creek at this point, and Annabeth's got this like weird look on her face, and she's like, Percy, get out of the water. So he does, and then he like immediately like slumps over. He's like immediately like tired and exhausted. And Annabeth says something about, she's like, oh, I really thought it would have been Zeus. And before anything else can happen, there's like a howl that rips through the air, and Percy is like tackled back by this huge dog-like thing, and it tears at his armor, but it's quickly shot down by a bunch of arrows, dying then and there. Percy is wounded, and Annabeth's like, get back in the water, get back in the water. And once he does, he like starts to heal, starts to feel better, and then there's a bunch of gasps from everyone around him. But they weren't watching my wounds heal. They were staring at something above my head. Percy, Annabeth said, pointing. By the time I looked up, the sign was already fading, but I could still make out the hologram of a green light, spinning and gleaming. A 3-tipped spear. A trident. Your father, Annabeth murmured. This is really not good. It is determined, Chiron announced. All around me, campers started kneeling, even the Aries cabin, although they didn't look happy about it. My father? I asked, completely bewildered. Poseidon, Chiron said. Earthshaker, Stormbringer, father of horses. Hail Perseus Jackson, son of the sea god. So, as nice as it was for Percy to learn who his father is, this dude over here, Poseidon, this really changes up things for him at camp. He is now living by himself, sitting by himself at meals, because he has no other siblings, because there was technically an oath saying that those 3 weren't gonna have kids, but there he is. The other campers have like kind of started to avoid him as well, which really sucks for him. His lessons with Luke are like now one-on-one. At some point, Percy finds this like newspaper article that basically says that him and his mom are still missing. Gabe over here suspects that Percy is behind it all. So that night, Percy has another dream about the 2 horses fighting on the beach, and storm is still raging around them, and he's like there trying to stop the 2 from fighting. Before he can though, the ground rips open beneath him, and he hears this deep voice telling him to come down, little demigod. The Grover is at his door the next morning, saying that Mr. D wants to talk to Percy. Once he gets there, Chiron is there as well, and these 2 offer him something that he was not expecting. They offer him a quest. Percy explains his dream to them, and he has basically figured out that Zeus and Poseidon are fighting about something. And Chiron explains that it's not just anything, it is Zeus's master lightning bolt. Apparently, Zeus thinks Percy stole the lightning bolt for his dad, and has demanded that he return it by the summer solstice. Percy obviously thinks this is crazy. He definitely did not steal a lightning bolt, because he like just learned about this whole world like a week ago, so when would he have gotten a chance to steal it? But Zeus is determined that Percy is responsible, because he and Poseidon had gotten into an argument not long before the bolt went missing. So Percy's then set up to the attic to speak to the oracle, which is what Percy had seen like up in the attic on that like first day at camp. He gets up there, he hears his voice, and it's none other than Smelling Gabe and his friends. The oracle has transformed to look like them, and each one of them tells him a line from his prophecy. It goes like this: you shall go west and face the god who has turned. You shall find what was stolen and see it safely returned. You shall be betrayed by one who calls you a friend, and you shall fail to say what matters most in the end. Now, Percy is thoroughly confused, as always, but goes back down to talk with Chiron and Grover. He only tells him the first 2 lines because he really doesn't want to say the other 2, because it definitely sounds like he's going to fail this quest, and he doesn't want to tell him that he's going to fail this quest. And Chiron's like, hey, don't dwell on these words too much because they often have double meanings, so... But we all know Percy's definitely going to dwell on these words, right? So, when Percy is asked where he thinks the Master Bolt would be, he says that he thinks that Hades might have it. And Chiron's like, that's definitely a possibility. The hellhounds that attacked you the other night, that was one of Hades's monsters. Chiron's like, all right, now you can bring 2 other people with you on this quest. Grover is one, obviously. He wants to get his protector's license back. And then it's revealed that Annabeth has also volunteered to go with Percy if he wants her to. She has been like desperate to go on a quest ever since she got to camp, so she was quick to volunteer. Percy's like, cool, 3 of us. Sick, let's do it. And the trio is gonna head west, find the entrance to the underworld, and retrieve the Master Bolt from Hades, with only 10 days left until the summer solstice, which is not a long time. As the trio is preparing to leave, Luke ends up finding Percy, and he gives him these sneakers that have little wings on them, and they were a gift to Luke from his dad Hermes for his quest that he went on, and he's like, I haven't really had a use for them, I want you to have them. Percy's a little wary of this gift because Zeus hates his guts, and flying in the air is probably not something he should do, but he like takes them, and he's like, thanks, Luke, I'll definitely use these. However, once Luke leaves, he immediately like gives them to Grover. He's like, hey, do you want these? I got a little magic item for you. Here you go. And Grover's like, sick, this is awesome. Chiron then gives Percy the same pen that he had used against Mrs. Dodds. We learned that this pen can turn into a sword. If you uncap it, it turns into a sword, and it always returns to your pocket, which is so sick and an awesome plot device so Percy doesn't have to run after his sword all the time. We love to see it. And its name is Anaclysmus, which translates to Riptide. He also quickly explains what the mist is. It's this kind of like magical veil that shields the Greek world from the mortal world. So mortals can't see any of this stuff. So they get on a bus and they're heading west. And Annabeth's being kind of cold to Percy, and he's like, hey, what the heck? What's going on? And she's like, well, our parents have a rivalry. You know, Poseidon and Athena, their kids have never gotten along, you know? It's not great. After seeing a missing poster for himself and his mom, Grover explains that the reason that Sally married Gabe was because he smelled so bad that it masked Percy's demigod scent, which is just a hilarious concept to me. But essentially, Sally put up with how awful Gabe was to protect Percy. And that just really sucks. So everything's going kind of okay for a while until Percy spots this old lady up at the front of the bus. And who is it? Mrs. Dodds. She is also joined by the other 2 Furies, which is not good. And they're heading towards the back of the bus where this trio is sitting. So Annabeth's like, here, take my hat. Percy puts it on. The bus ends up crashing. Everyone's fine. But the three heroes have to face off with the Furies now, and they fight, and luckily the heroes are able to get off the bus, and the bus then explodes. So, not great. Annabeth quickly chastises Percy for jumping into the fight, but later tells him that she's thankful that he came back to help them. So they walk for a while and end up finding this place called Auntie M's Garden Gnome Emporium. Grover doesn't have a good feeling about this place, but Percy and Annabeth are insistent that there will be a snack bar inside, so they're ready to go in. They are then greeted by a woman who has her hair covered by a shawl and invites them in for food. They tell her that they are orphans that are traveling with a circus and they got lost. That's their story that they're going with. And this woman, Auntie M, mentions something about how Annabeth has beautiful gray eyes, using her name even though Annabeth never told her her name. Grover's not having a time. He's feeling very unsettled by all of this. And eventually he's like, I hear hissing. what is this hissing? But the other two don't hear it, so he kind of pushes it aside, but he's like, something is not right here. However, as Auntie Em is continuing to talk, Annabeth is also starting to get a little bit more unnerved. But Percy's just chilling. He's having a great time. I mean, she gave them food. What more could he want? Eventually, Auntie Em asked them to pose for a statue, because she makes statues, and they agree, even though Annabeth and Grover are not super keen on the idea. And Grover just kind of keeps looking at the statue of a satyr. He's like, that really looks like my Uncle Ferdinand. And they're sitting to take a photo for the statue, and Annabeth and Grover are trying to get Percy to move because something is definitely wrong. Luckily, they're able to get him out of the way. I should have mentioned, this is Auntie Em over here. She lifts up her veil. In a reflection, Percy can see what is underneath. I could see Auntie Em's dark reflection in the orange glass. Her headdress was gone, revealing her face as a shimmering pale circle. Her hair was moving, writhing like serpents. Auntie Em. It's Medusa. Auntie Em is Medusa. So using the reflections in the area around them, Percy is able to get to Medusa, slicing her head clean off, and her whole body turns to dust, but her head gets left behind. And Annabeth's like, quickly cover it with the veil because it still works. It will still turn you to stone, you know? And this is where we get to see the absolute sass of Percy Jackson. He is asked he's going to put Medusa's head in a box and ship it off to the gods on Mount Olympus. Signed, with best wishes. Top tier, love it. So after a while, we get to learn a little bit about Grover's ultimate goal. Apparently, satyrs have been searching for the god of the wild, Pan, ever since he disappeared, and he needs to successfully be a protector in order to get his searcher's license. And his searcher's license will allow him to go and look for Pan. I don't know why he needs a license to do that, but he does. Apparently Grover has failed twice now, so this quest is absolutely his last chance to do this. Percy then figures out that Grover's last assignment was probably like 5 years ago. And who showed up at camp 5 years ago? Annabeth. So he thinks that Annabeth and Grover, there's something going on with that. Grover quickly shuts the conversation down though, and he's like, I can't talk about it. Grover then brings up that both he and Annabeth feel like there's something really, really weird about this quest specifically, especially when it comes to the kindly ones. But as I was saying, back at Medusa's, Annabeth and I agreed something strange is going on with this quest. Something isn't what it seems. Well, duh, I'm getting blamed for stealing a thunderbolt that Hades took. That's not what I mean, Grover said. The kindly ones were sort of holding back. Like Mrs. Dodds at Yancey Academy. Why did she wait so long to try and kill you? Then on the bus, they just weren't as aggressive as they could have been. They seemed plenty aggressive to me. Grover shook his head. They were screeching at us. Where is it? Where? Asking about me, I said. Maybe. But Annabeth and I, we both got a feeling that they weren't asking about a person. They said, where is it? They didn't seem to be asking about an object. That doesn't make sense. I know. But if we misunderstood something about the quest, and we only have 9 days to find the Master Bolt. He looked at me like he was hoping for answers, but I didn't have any. Quest might not be what it seems. Percy then reveals to Grover that the only reason he agreed to go on this quest was to try and get his mom back, and Grover's like, duh, we're still gonna go with you. So, another dream time. I should mention, demigods have a lot of dreams, and they often explain things, like tell you things about the future. That's what dreams do. For demigods, anyway. This time, he is at the edge of a pit, and there is a voice speaking to him. Little hero, an amused voice echoed far down in the darkness. Too weak, too young, but perhaps you will do. The voice felt ancient, cold, and heavy. It wrapped around me like sheets of lead. They have misled you, boy, it said. Barter with me. I will give you what you want. A shimmering image hovered over the void. My mother, frozen at the moment she dissolved in a shower of gold. Her face was distorted in pain, as if the Minotaur were still squeezing her neck. Her eyes looked directly at me, pleading, go. I tried to cry out, but my voice wouldn't work. Cold laughter echoed from the chasm. An invisible force pulled me forward. It would drag me into the pit unless I stood firm. Help me rise, boy. The voice became hungrier. Bring me the bolt. Strike a blow against the treacherous gods. The spirits of the dead whispered around me. No, wake. The image of my mother began to fade. The thing in the pit tightened its unseen grip around me. I realized it wasn't interested in pulling me in. It was using me to pull itself out. Good, it muttered. Good. Wake, the dead whispered. Wake. So when Percy wakes up, Grover is talking with a pink poodle who tells him that his family is offering a large reward for his return, and this could be their ticket west. They are able to use the money to buy Amtrak tickets west, and they spend 2 days on the train. And days, whatever I meant to say. You know what I meant to say. On the train, Annabeth kind of explains a little bit more about her life to Percy. She was sent down from Olympus when she was born to her father's doorstep, and he treated the whole thing as like the most inconvenient thing to ever happen to him. He ended up marrying Annabeth's stepmom, and she was absolutely horrible to her, which led Annabeth to run away when she was 7, meeting a couple of unexpected friends on her way to camp. But when Percy's like, hey, you want to tell me a little bit more about that? Annabeth's like, nope, we're done. So at the end of the first day, they find themselves in St. Louis, and Annabeth's like, oh, I would love to build something like the Arch. And she's like, I've always dreamed of being an architect. And there's kind of like a sweet little moment where Percy's like, hey, have Poseidon and Athena like ever worked on anything together? And she's like, I guess the chariot, Athena made the chariot, Poseidon created horses, they gotta work together like that. And Percy's like, well, if the 2 of them could cooperate doing that, maybe the 2 of us could cooperate here. And I was like, sure, why not? So at another point here, Percy brings up the kind of like powerful items that each of the gods have, specifically Hades' Helm of Darkness, which also turns him invisible. And he's like, does this mean that he could be like watching us? And Grover's like, yeah, it could, but we have no way of knowing, so don't worry about it. He also says that Hades was there at the winter solstice when the bolt was stolen, because it's the only time he's allowed on Olympus. Percy then decides, hey, let's go up to the Arch. The train's not going to be leaving for a while. Let's go to the top. It should be fun. In the elevator up, there's this weird lady with her chihuahua that keeps like looking at Percy, but he just kind of like brushes it off. However, when he gets to the top, he realizes that this lady has a forked tongue, and she eventually reveals herself to be Echidna, the mother of monsters. And the chihuahua isn't a chihuahua. It is actually the Chimera, a monster with the head of a lion, the front hooves and body of a goat, and the tail of a snake. So, horrifying. The Chimera charges, shooting fire at Percy, and blasts a hole through the top of the arch. And in a desperate attempt to escape, Percy jumps from the top of the arch into the Mississippi River, which I'm giving Rickrider the benefit of the doubt that he just didn't look up how far away the river was from the arch, because there's no fucking way that Percy made it that far, but is what it is. Percy's got water powers, so we're just gonna go with that. So, once he gets into the river, Percy realizes that he can breathe underwater, which is sick. Don't know how he hasn't found that out before, but he can breathe underwater. So, while he's underwater, he hears this voice calling to him, and it is a water spirit of some sort who tells him that he needs to go to Santa Monica before going to the underworld, and she also tells him to not trust the gifts, whatever the gifts are. And she ends the whole conversation by saying that his father believes in him before disappearing. Percy reunites with Annabeth and Grover, explain the whole situation to them, and they tell him that absolutely we need to go to Santa Monica. You cannot ignore a summons from your father like that. And they get back on the train, and they make it all the way to Denver. That's where the train ends. So once in Denver, Annabeth introduces Percy to the concept of iris messaging, which is the best way for demigods to communicate over long distances, because using technology attracts monsters to them. They try to message Chiron, but they get Luke instead. Luke explains that things are very tense at camp with the whole Zeus versus Poseidon thing, and cabins have taken sides. He asks Percy, like, hey, have the shoes been any good for you? And Percy's like, yeah, they've been great. I've really used them a lot. I've loved them, So that night, the trio is at a diner, and they hear this really loud motorcycle from outside. And then a large man comes into the diner and sits down at their table, and it is none other than Ares, god of war. He offers them a deal. They go and get a shield that he left behind back for him, and he'll get them a ride to Los Angeles, where the underworld entrance is. The entire thing's pretty tense. Percy's like arguing with Ares, and Annabeth and Grover are like, stop, dude, please stop. Don't argue with a god. But yeah, it works out, luckily. After a while, they agree to go and get the shield, and apparently he's left it in a water park, and they make their way to where it's left, and it's in the Tunnel of Love. Annabeth explains that apparently Ares and Aphrodite have been having an affair for thousands of years, and her husband, Aphrodite's husband, Hephaestus, has been trying to find ways to capture them while they've been having an affair, and that's why they have to meet at random water parks Tunnel of Love for their dates to try and hide from him. So, much to Annabeth's dismay, she and Percy end up in one of the boats to go and get the shield back through the Tunnel of Love, and Grover's gonna stay behind, be back up with the flying shoes. They find the shield as well as a scarf that belongs to Aphrodite, but when they go to grab them, it sets off some sort of tripwire, and the two are trapped in a net on the boat, and then these mechanical bug spider things crawl onto the boat, and Annabeth's freaking out, trying to get away from them as fast as possible. Luckily, Percy's able to use his water powers, get out of the trap in the tunnel, and they technically succeeded, but Trio is pissed at Ares. So angry. However, they get back to the diner, and he does have a ride for them, as promised, in the back of a truck filled with zoo animals. This only pisses Percy off more, but Grover is quick to be thank you for the ride, we're gonna be on our way now. Ares does tell Percy, though, that his mom isn't dead and that she was just taken before he leaves. I should also mention that Ares does give them backpacks filled with supplies as well, so that's a nice little treat since their stuff kind of got blown up on the bus a few days ago. The animals in the van are not in good condition, they're not being taken care of, so the trio does what they can to help them before settling in for the night. Percy and Annabeth get another chance to talk, and Percy figures out that the reason that Annabeth was so freaked out at the little metal spiders was because of her mom Athena and the whole Arachne situation. Arachne was a mortal girl that challenged Athena to a weaving contest. She was pretty good. Athena didn't like that, so she turned her into the first spider, and apparently, as revenge, all spiders tend to seek out Athena children and attack them. So Grover joins in, and we get to learn about the first time Grover tried to bring someone to camp. He was assigned to bring Thalia to camp, only when he found her, she wasn't alone. Annabeth and Luke were also with her. He was kind of nervous having to bring 3 half-bloods back to camp, and he ended up taking a couple of wrong turns on the way back, which allowed for the kindly ones to catch up with them, and Zeus obviously turned Thalia into a pine tree. Annabeth, though, is quick to reassure Grover that nobody blames him for what happened and that he is the bravest and kindest satyr that she has ever met. Grover doesn't respond, though, because he just falls asleep right there. Percy and Annabeth get to talking again, and she tells him that a couple of summers ago her father reached out and apologized for everything and wanted her to come home, but when she tried, nothing had changed, so she called Chiron and was let me come back. Now we get to one of my favorite moments in the whole series. So if the gods fight, I said, will things line up like they did in the Trojan War? Will it be Athena versus Poseidon? She put her head against the backpack Ares had given us and closed her eyes. I don't know what my mom will do. I just know I'll fight next to you. Why? Because you're my friend, Seaweed Braid. Any more stupid questions? They're so cute. I love little baby Percy and Annabeth. I should also mention their nicknames for each other. Percy calls Annabeth Wise Girl, and Annabeth calls Percy Seaweed Brain. I think their nicknames are hilarious. So, that night, Percy dreams of a girl with punk-styled black hair and dark eyeliner around her stormy green eyes. Those eyes do not stay green. He then hears a voice from the pit speaking with someone whose voice he almost recognizes. So the next morning they have reached Las Vegas and the trio frees the animals and they end up leaving the van because obviously the van's not going to go any further than that. And yeah, they find themselves standing in front of the Lotus Hotel and Casino and are invited inside by the doorman. It is just crazy inside. There's giant rides and water slides and it's a giant huge crazy place, and they are somehow given a room key and casino cards. Sick. I should mention, they're 12 while this is happening. So the trio sets off into the casino, having a blast and doing all kinds of fun things. Percy's having a really good time until he notices that the guy next to him seems really out of place. He apparently looks like an Elvis impersonator with bell-bottom jeans and ridiculously gelled hair, and he uses words like groovy. And he's like, yeah, I've been here for 2 weeks, I'm having a great time. But when Percy asks him what year it is, the guy's like, 1977. For reference, this book takes place in the early 2000s. So Percy's freaking out, and he like tries to go and find his friends, and when he finds Annabeth, it like takes him a moment, but he's finally able to shake her out of like whatever trance she is in. They find Grover, same thing, can't really shake him out of it, but they eventually do, and they leave, despite everything that is pulling all three of them to go back into the casino. However, once they do leave, they end up seeing the date on a newspaper. They were inside that casino for 5 days. They now only have 1 day until the summer solstice. Essentially, time just speeds up inside the casino, in case that wasn't clear. So, they are desperate now. They only have 1 day until the summer solstice deadline, and they still got a lot of things to do. They still have to get to LA, get the bolt back, and then somehow get all the way back to New York. Crazy. However, they're able to like get in a cab, use their little casino card, and get all the way to LA. So, on the way there, Percy recounts his latest dream to the two of them, and he really stresses the importance of the voice in the pit. And he also tells them that the voice seemed to be looking for like two separate items, but they cannot seem to figure out what the second item is. Obviously, the first one is the master bolt. There's clearly something much larger going on, and Percy is really having kind of some doubts about little Hades over here in the first place. But they've made it this far. They don't really have much time to think about anything else, so they gotta go with it. They get dropped off at the Santa Monica Pier, the place where the woman in the river told Percy to go. Percy jumps in. He then meets a Nereid, a spirit of the sea, and she's like, I serve your father. It's been so long since there's been a son of the sea god, and we've all been watching you closely. And this kind of reminds Percy of all the times that he kind of like saw what looked like faces in the ocean when he was a kid. But this thought kind of makes him angry, because that meant his dad was watching him and didn't help him with anything at all. So the Nereid then gives Percy 3 pearls and tells him that when he is in need, smash them at his feet. And she reminds him that what belongs to the sea will always return to the sea. She is about to leave and Percy is like, hey, what the heck did you mean by don't trust the gifts? But the Nereid leaves before she can explain anything else further. He goes back to his friends, shows them the pearls, and that's kind of like, I don't really know how to feel about this. Like, no gifts are actually free, but, you know, there's gonna be a price to pay eventually for these. So as the trio's walking, they end up in front of a store that like has a whole bunch of TVs showing the news, and Gabe is on the news talking to Barbara Walters. He's basically running a smear campaign against Percy, blaming him for everything. It doesn't help that all of the monsters attacks that have been following Percy, people have kind of seen him there, so there's not a lot of great things going on with that. Anyways, they are walking along and end up having to run into a store to kind of escape this like group of kids that looked like they were about to jump them. So the store that they run into is named Krusty's Waterbed Palace. They are immediately greeted by Krusty. Great name. He literally called himself that. And he's like, I get it, those kids are a menace. And he starts to show them like the different waterbeds inside of the store. He gets both Grover and Annabeth to lie down on those beds, and he snaps his fingers and ropes immediately appear out of nowhere and like tie them down to the beds. The ropes start pulling them in like 2 different directions, stretching them, and Krusty, calm as ever, explains to Percy that each bed must fit perfectly, and Annabeth and Grover need to be stretched. They're a little bit too short, and it's only a couple of inches, so they might even live too. Great. Krusty explains to Percy that his real name is Procrustes, and a plan kind of starts forming in Percy's mind. He essentially starts to like sweet talk Krusty, and Loki like hypes him up, telling him how brilliant of a scheme this was. And Annabeth and Grover are just like yelling at him, like, get us out of here! What are you doing? He ends up getting Krusty to lie down on one of the beds to like demonstrate what it does before he snaps his fingers, and Krusty gets tied down, and Percy's like, ooh, you're a little bit too tall. Guess we'll have to shaves him off, and just slices Krusty's head off. Fantastic. Percy's able to free the other two, but has to make a little bit of a joke about how Annabeth seems like a little bit taller, which she just like rolls her eyes to. So they end up in front of this place called DOA Recording Studios. This is apparently the entrance to the underworld. Okay. They walk up to the front desk, and the man at the front desk is named Charon, which is different from Chiron, two different people. So they explain that they want to go to the underworld, and he's like, how did you die? And Grover's like, oh, we drowned in a bathtub. All three of us together. Convincing story. Charon's kind of suspicious, but they give him 3 golden drachmas, which is the like currency of the gods. And he's like, okay, cool. Let's go. Awesome. So he takes them to the underworld. So underworld's pretty freaky. That's the best way to put it. Everyone around them is dead, so it's really, really unsettling. Charon drops them off at the gates, where they come face to face with Cerberus, Hades' 3-headed guard dog. Annabeth, though, has a plan. Percy also had a plan to like throw a stick and get Cerberus to chase it. Doesn't work. Annabeth, though, has a red rubber ball. Apparently, throws that. It works. Cerberus is having a great time. And they're able to get past him, no issues. So as they're walking, we get a little bit of an explanation on how the underworld works. There's like 3 sections. Anyone that comes into the underworld has to get judged, and it will determine which of the 3 sections they're going to. First is the Field of Elysium. That is reserved for the people that did really good in their lives. We get the Fields of Asphodel, which are basically if you didn't do anything really bad or really good, you just kind of end up there, you know, like floating around. And they have finally the Field of Punishment. That's for the people that did really bad things, and they get like specially crafted punishments that fit what they did in their lives. There's also a kind of like half section of Elysium called the Isles of the Blessed. Basically, anyone that gets Elysium can choose to be reborn, and if they get Elysium 3 different times, they can get to the Isle of the Blessed. They're going to the underworld, and things are kind of going pretty well, so that means it's time for things to go wrong. So if you remember, Grover's got those winged shoes, right? They start to act kind of weird, and eventually they just start dragging Grover away towards this pit. Percy and Annabeth are chasing after him, and Annabeth's like, untie the shoes, get them off! But Grover is like kind of struggling, and Percy, as they're running, realizes that Grover is being dragged towards the same pit that Percy has been dreaming about, the one with the voice that keeps talking to him. Luckily, because Grover has hooves, he's able to kick the shoes off of him, and they go sailing down into the pit below. This is where they realize that that pit is the entrance to Tartarus. Percy's been hearing someone speaking from the depths of Tartarus to him. So, scary, scary, scary thoughts. Tartarus seems to be kind of like pulling them in, so they like hightail it out of there and head back towards Hades' palace. So they get to the gates, they make it inside the palace, and they get all the way to like the throne room where Hades is like seemingly waiting for them. He was the 3rd god I'd met, but the first 2 really struck me as godlike. He was at least 10 feet tall for one thing, and dressed in black silk robes and a crown of braided gold. His skin was albino white, his hair shoulder length and jet black. He wasn't bulked up like Ares, but he radiated power. He lounged on his throne of fused human bones, looking lithe, graceful, and dangerous as a panther. I immediately felt like he should be giving the orders. He knew more than I did. He should be my master. Then I told myself to snap out of it. Percy's like, alright, I'm here. Give me the master bolt back. That was not the right thing to say. Hades is like, how dare you come here and demand that of me after all that you have done? Percy is so confused. He doesn't understand what's happening. And Hades is like, why would I want a war? I have so many dead people to deal with. I do not need more dead people to deal with. I am already backed up as it is. Why the hell would I want a war? So now we get to kind of learn what Hades thinks happened. He thinks that Percy stole both Zeus's Master Bolt and Hades' Helm of Darkness, which nobody knew was missing. So this is why the Furies and Mrs. Dodds have been chasing after Percy. They are trying to get the helm back. They don't want the Master Bolt. So rather than being kind of scared at this, Percy's just pissed. He's like, now not just 1, but 2 gods have now accused me of stealing There are things when I haven't even known about this stuff for like more than a week. What the heck? So Percy's like, Hades, you are just like Zeus. And Hades is like, you have the Master Bolt. What are you talking about? And everyone's like, no, we don't have the Master Bolt. And Hades is like, open your backpack. Return my property. But I don't have your helm. I came for the Master Bolt, which you already possess, Hades shouted. You came here with it, little fool, thinking you could threaten me? But I didn't. Open your pack then. A horrible feeling struck me. The weight in my backpack like a bowling ball. It couldn't be. I slung it off my shoulder and unzipped it. Inside was a 2-foot-long metal cylinder spiked on both ends, humming with energy. Percy, Annabeth said, how? I don't know. I don't understand. Everyone's just flabbergasted by the whole thing. And Percy's like, this has to be a trick. Hades set me up. I didn't have the Master Bolt in my backpack before this. And then it dawns on him. Percy's like, there's been some mistake. And Hades is like, there is no mistake here. I know why you brought me the bolt. You brought it with me to bargain for what I have. And then Hades like opens his palm and like Percy's mom is there and like a golden orb. And Percy's like, oh no, what do I do? What the heck? This was his whole point. This is why he wanted to come to the underworld in the first place. Having the bolts, though, complicates things, because now he could just get his mom and he could leave. But then war. We don't want the war, right? So Percy then remembers the pearls, and Hades kind of like sense that he's thinking about this, and it's like, show me them. And Percy like brings them out, and Hades is just like, only 3, Hades said. What a shame. You do realize that each only protects a single person. Try to take your mother then, little godling. And which of your friends will you leave behind to spend eternity with me? Go on, choose. Or give me the backpack and accept my terms. So this is where it really dawns on our trio that they were tricked by somebody. Grover is like, take your mom, I will stay behind, I'm the protector, I'm a satyr, I don't experience death the same way, I'll just be reincarnated into a plant. Percy's like, nope, not gonna happen. So Annabeth's like, nope, I got a quest, leave me behind, I'm fine. And Percy's like, no, we are not doing this. So he gives each of them a pearl and then turns to his mom. I turned to face my mother. I desperately wanted to sacrifice myself and use the last pearl on her, but I knew what she would say. She would never allow it. I had to get the bolt back to Olympus and tell Zeus the truth. I had to stop the war. She would never forgive me if I saved her instead. I thought about the prophecy made at Half-Blood Hill, what seemed like 1,000,000 years ago. You will fail to save what matters most in the end. I'm sorry, I told her. I'll be back. I'll find a way. Right? There is a prophecy here. That's what that's all about. So, Percy's like, Hades, uncle, I will find your helm. I will bring it back to you. But I gotta go. So, our trio smashes the pearl at their feet, and they soon find themselves back in Santa Monica Bay. They get to the shore. Apparently Hades has caused like an earthquake and the whole city is on fire. And he is now going to be sending an army of the dead after them. Not great. However, the underworld's not their biggest problem right now. They have to get the bolt back to Zeus today. They also have to deal with the god who tricked them. They get to the pier and they start kind of talking about everything that had gone down. And Percy recounts all of the things that had happened in the prophecy that were right. They go west and face the god who has turned, but it wasn't Hades. Hades didn't want to war among the big 3. There was somebody else who pulled off the theft. Someone stole Zeus's Master Bolt and Hades' helm and framed me because I'm Poseidon's kid. Poseidon will get blamed by both sides, and by sundown today, there will be a 3-way war, and I'll have caused it. Grover shook his head, mystified. But who would be that sneaky? Who would want war that bad? I stopped in my tracks, looking down the beach. Gee, let me think. Who's walking down the beach? Ares. Ares just like confesses to everything, being like, I didn't steal the bolt and helm directly. I got someone else to do it because gods can't take other gods' like magical items. But it was my plan. He then shows that he does in fact have the helm with him. And Ares is like, yeah, I gave you the backpack, and it was like enchanted, so that way when you got to the underworld, that's the only time that the Master Bolt would appear. You know? So you would never know until you got to the underworld, and then it'd be too late. Sorry, bro. Percy's like, okay, why didn't you just keep the bolt for yourself? Why send it to the underworld? And Ares is kind of like, huh, I don't know. He like kind of considers the question for a moment. He's like, why would I send all that power away? And he's kind of like in this trance for a moment before seemingly shaking it off and being like, I just didn't want to deal with the trouble. This would have been easier. But there is something weird's going on. And Percy like calls him out on this. Like, you're lying here, buddy. You're lying, I said. Sending the bolt to the underworld wasn't your idea, was it? Of course it was. Smoke drifted up from his sunglasses as if they were about to catch fire. You didn't order the theft, I guessed. Somebody else sent a hero to steal the 2 items. Then, when Zeus sent you to hunt him down, you caught the thief. But you didn't turn him over to Zeus. Something convinced you to let him go. You kept the items until another hero could come along and complete the delivery. That thing in the pit is ordering you around. I'm the god of war. I don't take orders from no one. I don't have dreams. I hesitated. Who said anything about dreams? Ares is like trying to cover his tracks here because Percy's clearly figured him out, but it's not working too well. Eventually, Ares is like, sorry, kid. Gotta kill you. You know too much. And Percy's like, all right, let's go. Let's fight. I'm ready. Love him to bits. But this dude's a child. That is a god. All right, so before the fight, Annabeth gives Percy her camp necklace as a little, like, token of luck, saying that Poseidon and Athena will work together, and Grover gives him like a little flattened tin can, because Grover eats tin cans, and is like, here, satyrs are with you. So he walks over, and the two start to fight. He then remembers something that Annabeth had told him, that even strength has to bow down to wisdom sometimes. So as one would expect, the fight's not going well for Percy, because that is a literal god. He is a child. Even using the water around him is not helping, because, once again, Ares is a god. Percy ends up retreating a little bit, getting actually into the water, which is kind of like energizes him again. And he's able to kind of see the fight a little bit more clearly now. The cops have shown up around them, and they're shouting at them to drop their weapons, and Percy kind of notices that Ares' sword is kind of like flickering between a sword and like a giant gun. Not great. But that's clearly what the mist is doing. The mist is showing the mortals that they have weapons that aren't swords, essentially. So Percy is fully in the ocean. He's using that to his advantage, and he's able to outsmart Ares, getting around him by like riding a wave, I think, and he stabs the god in his heel. And Ichor, the golden blood of the gods, starts flowing out of Ares' boot, and he is about to advance on Percy when he just stops. It was as if a cloud covered the sun, but worse. Light faded, sound and color drained away. A cold, heavy presence passed over the beach, slowing time, dropping the temperature to freezing, and making me feel like life was hopeless. Fighting was useless. The darkness lifted. Ares looked stunned. So everything is like in chaos around them, and Ares just lowers his sword. He tells Percy, you have made an enemy of a god, and you have sealed your fate. Every time you raise a sword in battle, you will feel the curse of Ares, and beware. Ares disappears in a blinding light, leaving behind the helm. Above them, the Furies appear, and Percy gives them the helm. He's like, here you go, I don't want this, take it back to Hades, so he stops going after me and trying to start a war. So Percy gets back to his friends, and they're like, yep, we all felt that, right? That was really weird. Okay, great, I'm glad we all felt that weird, dark presence. Grover thinks it might have been the Furies, but Percy's like, I don't think. I think it was something a lot more powerful than the Furies. So now comes the matter of getting back to New York. And Annabeth's like, that's impossible unless we fly, which you really shouldn't be doing. But Percy's like, yep, we gotta catch a flight. It's literally the only way we're getting back in time. So here's a story that gets put out to the immortals, because they've been kind of following this news story of Percy, this crazy child who is destroying monuments and different things around the world. So according to the news in Los Angeles, there was an explosion that was caused by some guy shooting a police car's gas line that had ruptured during the earthquake. This guy was a crazy kidnapper, Ares, and he had kidnapped Percy along with 2 other kids and had brought them across the country. Percy wasn't a criminal, and all of the times that he was like connected to bad things, it was just him trying to escape this crazy kidnapper. So Percy ends up getting interviewed by the news. He's like, all I want is to get home to my loving stepfather, and as a thank you to the people of Los Angeles, my stepfather would like to give each of you one free appliance from his store. Here's the phone number. Go ahead and call him. It's a lie, obviously. He just wants to mess with Gabe, and I just love it. So they get on a plane and fly back to New York. Percy is terrified the entire time, but they make it. The trio does split up here, with Annabeth and Grover going back to Camp Half-Blood to fill Chiron in, and Percy heading to the Empire State Building where Mount Olympus is. He gets up there, heads to the 600th floor, which is apparently how high you have to go up to get to Mount Olympus, and it is beautiful up there. From the top of the clouds rose a decapitated peak of a mountain, its summit covered with snow. Clinging to the mountainside were dozens of multi-level palaces, a city of mansions, all with white columned porticos, gilded terraces, and bronze braziers glowing with 1,000 fires. Roads wound crazily up the peak, with the largest palace gleaming against the snow. Precariously perched gardens bloomed with olive trees and rose bushes. I could make out an open-air market filled with colorful tents, a stone amphitheater built on one side of the mountain, a hippodrome and a coliseum on the other. It was an ancient Greek city, except it wasn't in ruins. It was new and clean and colorful, the way Athens must have looked 2,500 years ago. So as Percy's like walking through Olympus, he realizes that Hades kind of built his palace to resemble Olympus, since he's not allowed there except during the winter solstice. Then he makes it to the main throne room, and he spots who must be Zeus and Poseidon. Zeus has this like blue striped suit on, has a beard with like gray and white hair that kind of resembles a storm cloud, and Poseidon has a more like a Bermuda shorts and Tommy Bahama shirt. He's just kind of super chill. The shirt's got like coconuts and like parrots on it, and he's wearing sandals. He's got dark hair and the same green eyes that Percy does. Percy addresses his father first, of course, and Zeus is like, I don't like that. Poseidon's able to calm him down though, and Zeus is like, all right, are you here to confess to all of your crimes? And, you know, I could have blasted you out of the sky, blah, 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 blah. And Poseidon's like, whoa, bro, let the kid explain, please. So Percy tells Zeus the whole story. Luckily, Zeus is like, I can see you are telling the truth, which is like a big sigh of relief to Percy. But Zeus is like kind of conflicted about the whole Ares thing though, because it just doesn't seem like something that Ares would do. This is where Percy explains that he thinks something must have been controlling Ares, and that's why he did what he did. He mentions the pit, Tartarus, and Poseidon and Zeus kind of have like a quick little conversation between the two of them, and Percy's only able to catch one word of it: father. Zeus thanks him for his service, and he leaves, leaving Percy and Poseidon alone. So, at this point, Percy has figured out who the voice in the pit is. The Titan Kronos, father to 6 of the Olympians. Poseidon gives Percy a little bit of a history lesson, explaining who Kronos was. He apparently had killed his father Ouranos and taken control of the world, and out of fear that his children would do the same to him, he ate his children except for Zeus, who eventually came back, freed his siblings, and took down Kronos. Kronos was then imprisoned in the pits of Tartarus. So Percy's insistent that Kronos is healing and is coming back, but Poseidon's like, no, not possible. Poseidon then says that he is not to speak of Kronos any longer, and also explains that his mom has been returned. Apparently, when Percy gave the helm to the Furies, Hades had her returned home. Poseidon also tells Percy that he has an important decision to make soon, and that there will be a package waiting for him when he gets home. So Poseidon also tells Percy that his mom is an amazing woman, but he's sorry that Percy was born with all the dangers that come with being a demigod. He's like, I am proud of you, and you really are a son of the sea god. And then Percy leaves. He catches a cab back to his mom's place, and she had apparently appeared right in that apartment that morning, scaring Gabe to death. But she also doesn't remember anything after the Minotaur. Gabe is pissed though because of the little stunt Percy pulled in Los Angeles, and he goes off on Percy and eventually like raises his hand, and Percy can see his mom flinch, and that was enough for Percy. He knew something drastic needed to be done, and it needed to be done soon. So he drags his mom back into his room, and sitting on his bed is the same package that Percy had sent to the gods. Medusa's head is in that box. Suddenly, Percy realizes the decision that Poseidon had been talking about, and he turns to his mom and is like, hey, do you want Gabe gone? She's like, it's not that simple. And Percy's just like, do you want him gone? And Sally finally concedes, saying, yes, she does, but she doesn't want Percy to solve her problems. And Percy's like, one look inside this box, and that will get rid of him forever. And you deserve to have this, Mom. You deserve the world. He ends up leaving her the box, letting her decide what she's going to do. And Percy's like, I'm going to go back to camp, but I don't know for how long. And he just leaves. So when he gets back, our little trio over here are celebrities. Everyone loves them after what they've done. So they are the first heroes since Luke to come back from a quest successfully. So everyone's pretty excited. The camp, though, was kind of convinced that they had died. So they all made like little like funeral pyres for them. Annabeth's was made by her siblings. Percy doesn't have any siblings, so the Ares captain volunteered to make his. And it was just a white bed sheet painted with smiley faces that had X's over their eyes and the word loser painted in bright red across the front. So Grover, in response to the quest being successful, was finally given his searcher's license, meaning that he can finally begin his search for the nature god Pan. A week after getting back, Percy gets a letter from his mom that basically explains that Gabe had mysteriously gone missing, and in no relation whatsoever, she had sold her first and only statue entitled The Poker Player. She made bank off of this statue and was able to get enough money to move somewhere a little bit nicer, and she's going to start college again. She had to drop out of college because of her parents dying, so she's finally able to go back to college. And she also mentions that there's a good private school in New York, in the city, that she wants Percy to attend, so he could even live at home with her. Percy does not answer her letter for a while, though. He really doesn't know what to say. 4th of July comes. Grover says goodbye to Percy and Annabeth because he's going off on his quest to find Pan. So July passes, and Percy can't help but think about the prophecy. So, first line, you should go west and face the god who has turned. Check, went west. Fought Ares. Great. Second line, you shall find what was stolen and see it safely returned. Double check, both the helm and bolt were back where they rightfully belonged. Third line, you shall be betrayed by one who calls you a friend. This one kind of trips him up. He's like, I guess it could be Ares. He pretended to be our friend, but he's not really sure about that one. And then final line, you shall fail to save what matters most in the end. Final check, he really didn't save his mom, essentially, and that was what kind of mattered to him most for the quest. So everything seems to be checked off, but there's still kind of like this lingering feeling that something is not right. However, he finally reaches the end of summer and he gets his first bead on his camp necklace. The beads are meant to represent an important event that happens during the summer. So like when Thalia sacrificed herself that year, the bead had a little pine tree on it. So this year it has a trident on it. So the next morning, Percy receives a note being like, all right, decide, are you staying or are you going for the winter? And that's the decision that he has been dreading, and he just doesn't know what to do. Percy has not made up his mind yet and decides, I'm just going to go off to the sword arena. I'm going to blow off some steam. Maybe I'll come up with a decision then. And when he gets there, who's there? Luke. One thing that Percy notices when he sees Luke is that his sword's a little weird. It's got like kind of like this weird coloring to it. And Luke's like, oh, this is Backbiter. It's my new sword. It's got both celestial bronze, which is what all of the weapons that the demigods use is made out of, as well as steel, so it can hurt both demigods and mortals. And I'm like, Luke, why the heck would you need a sword that hurts mortals? Luke suggests going into the woods one last time to try and find something to fight, and Percy's kind of a little bit hesitant. He's like, I don't really know if I want to do this, but he agrees to it anyway. And they start walking and they begin talking about their like respective quests. And as Luke talks, he seems really bitter about his quest. I've lived at Half-Blood Hill year-round since I was 14, he told me. Ever since Thalia, well, you know. I trained and trained and trained. I never got to be a normal teenager out there in the real world. Then they threw me one quest, and when I came back, it was like, okay, ride's over. Have a nice life. Luke then reveals that he is leaving camp and isn't coming back. Luke then snaps his fingers, and a black scorpion appears on the ground. Percy is about to go for his sword, and Luke's like, nope, don't do that. It's pointless. Once you're stung, you'll be dead in 60 seconds. So, then as expected, Luke has to monologue a little bit. I saw a lot out there in the world, Percy, Luke said. Didn't you feel it? The darkness gathering, the monsters growing stronger. Didn't you realize how useless it all is? All the heroics being pawns of the gods. They should have been overthrown thousands of years ago, but they've hung on, thanks to us half-bloods. I couldn't believe this was happening. Luke, you're talking about our parents, I said. He laughed. That's supposed to make me love them? Their precious Western civilization is a disease, Percy. It's killing the world. The only way to stop it is to burn it to the ground, start over with something more honest. You're as crazy as Ares. His eyes flared. Ares is a fool. He never realized the true master he was serving. If I had time, Percy, I could explain, but I'm afraid you won't live that long. Luke then reveals that he has been working for Kronos this whole time. He tells Percy to begin with his quest to steal an apple from the Garden of the Hesperides and to bring it to Olympus, which was one of the 12 labors of Hercules. This just seemed like a slap in the face to Luke because the best his father could give him was something that another hero had already done. He held a lot of resentment towards Hermes for that, and then he began dreaming of Kronos, who gave him a new quest, a better quest. I began to dream of Kronos. He convinced me to steal something worthwhile, something no hero had ever had the courage to take. We went on that winter solstice field trip. While the other campers were asleep, I snuck into the throne room and took Zeus's master bolt right from his chair. Hades' helm of darkness, too. You wouldn't believe how easy it was. The Olympians are so arrogant, they never dreamed someone would dare steal from them. Their security is horrible. I was halfway across New Jersey before I heard the storms rumbling, and I knew they'd discover my theft. He then goes on to explain that yes, Ares did catch him, but he was able, using Kronos' guidance, to convince Ares to let him go. So, the scorpion's still crawling up Percy's leg, but he's kind of started to piece some things together. Luke let the Hellhound in, the winged shoes had been cursed, and they were meant to drag Percy to Tartarus, but he had given them to Grover instead. And Percy then brings up Thalia, being like, she gave her life to protect you, and this is how you repay her, and this sets Luke off. Rather than fighting Percy, he just leaves, and the scorpion stings Percy. They're next to a creek, and Percy tries to get to the water, but the poison's too strong. It's not healing him, and his brain's going fuzzy. He's like, I need to get back to camp. And luckily, 2 nymphs are able to drag him to the edge of the forest where someone spots him and is able to call out for help before Percy passes out. He wakes up. Annabeth's there. She's feeding him nectar. And Chiron is there as well, back in his wheelchair form. Annabeth calls him an idiot, of course. And Percy kind of fills them in on everything that Luke said. Annabeth is in shock, though, because she and Luke were, really close. Chiron is able to kind of calm Percy down, because Percy got very heated talking about this, and he's like, we can't go after Luke right now. That is not smart. We will wait until the right opportunity. And he's about to leave, but he tells Annabeth that they are here. She helps Percy outside and tells him that she took his advice and contacted her dad, and she's going to try going back home for the summer, or for the fall, and see if it works again. She then tells him that next summer, when we get back, the 2 of us, we are going to go and find Luke. Whether or not we're granted a quest, we are going to find him. So after he watches Annabeth leave, Percy makes a decision that he is going to go back home as well. And that is where we end The Lightning Thief. So there it is. That is The Lightning Thief by Rick Riordan. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I did want to put here where I got the art for the different, for all the people on the slideshow. The majority of the art that I used, you'll see it for any of the pictures that look like the main trio of Percy, Annabeth, and Grover. All of the art that looks like that is done by Viktoria Ridzel. This is the official art that you will find on Rick Riordan's website, so that is why I used that. However, there is an official art for every character. I used some pictures from movies. The picture of Mr. D is done by Rocco. He did the art for the graphic novels of the books. So that is that. And that's going to stay consistent. I've got either it's going to be the official art, it's going to be the graphic novel art, or it's just going to be random pictures of people from movies that I think fit these characters. So anyways, I really hope you guys enjoyed this. This was a ton of fun for me to do, and I really got a good time talking about this. So yeah, that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!